Hello for a new week of world economic news, and we start in China with a Blytick chart of the leading economic indicators for China, which turned down during the recession, came back up again because they spent huge in stimulus, but were kind of coming down again off the backside of that stimulus, but have got a little hook up again now, which is good news for the world. It might not be so good for them because it might mean inflation, but it leads us to the second article, which is Pragmatic Capitalism and the World's Increasing Dependence on China, where he writes, with much of the developed world still entangled in the balance sheet recession, China has become an increasingly important economy. While discussing their biggest risk since 2011, UniCredit analysts explained why it's not the EMU, that's Europe, that worries him in the future, it's China. Later we get the incredible growth in China is a welcome development for a Western world whose problems would be far worse without it. But there are alarming facets in the Chinese growth story, particularly for one who calls himself or herself a capitalist. China appears to have perfected this form of state-run capitalism, and it is working, at least for now. This incredible growth has led to an ever-increasing reliance on China's economy by a lot of other economies. Really, the global economy is kind of leaning on China now. I'll read some more. Okay. While it's great to see citizens in China breaking free from the stranglehold of communism, it's also disconcerting that the global economy has become increasingly dependent on a nation that is insistent on running a flawed currency peg that contributes so severely to global imbalances, those famous imbalances. More importantly, it remains to be seen whether this form of state-run capitalism can play out over the long run without causing severe imbalances in the domestic economy. Can they possibly get it right, those Politburo people? At some point, paying construction workers in Beijing to build an unpopulated city out in the desert has repercussions in the form of inflation. With their focus on managing foreign exports via a currency peg, it will be interesting to see if China has the tools and fortitude to deal with the more important risk of rising domestic overcapacity. That has always been the problem, hasn't it? Overcapacity. If they can't properly contain these problems, the repercussions will be felt not just in China but all over the globe. I'm sorry, but they are very important now. And that's from UniCredit. Moving on to Gollum 14, who gives us UniCredit, another Lehman Brothers. Yes, it's strange that amidst all yesterday's attacks on democracy in Ireland and Greece and worries about state sovereignty in those countries, as well as Portugal and Spain, that it was Italy's largest bank which suffered a very large fall in share price, the largest of any bank, I think. That was back on Friday. UniCredit lost 4.2% of its share price in one day, taking it down to just €1.63 a share. And it's an interesting enough article showing that UniCredit might be in trouble. No guarantees, but just might be. New York Times does a reasonable article on Spain. I'm often seeing that Europe does quite good articles on the United States, and States articles do quite good articles on Europe. But Europe isn't so clever on Europe, and US doesn't seem too clever on the US. It's interesting. Or it's just me. Newly built ghost towns haunt banks in Spain. I don't need to go into that, but it's very similar to an article I put up on the website, I think. Did I put it up on YouTube? Can't remember. But newly built ghost towns haunt banks in Spain, and the classic picture of a ghost town in Spain. No one using it. And obviously the banks are going to have to cop for it somewhere along the line. John Mauldin, Thoughts from the Front Line. His last week's newsletter was entitled Kicking the Can Down the Road. And we get, because everyone seems to be wanting to be champions of this, but while the US Congress is certainly an adept player at this game, I think the world champions at this present time have to be the political and economic leaders of Europe. Ta-da! Mais oui, yeah, we are the champions. kicking the can down the road. Obviously all about the shenanigans that the EU people got up to last week. Quite frankly, it boggled my mind. So I'm still trying to assimilate what they were saying. It looked at one time as though the German politicians were vying with each other to shaft the German population and do everything possible to keep the euro going at any cost to Germany. I didn't understand it. I don't think the dust has settled yet. I'll tell you when it does. FT Alphaville, the Bank of England sterling liquidity support to Ireland. Again, this was back last Friday. Here's an intriguing arrangement from the European Central Bank and Bank of England on Friday. As Bloomberg reports, the European Central Bank and Bank of England set up a temporary swap line to help ease liquidity problems at Ireland's lenders in case the sovereign debt crisis intensifies. Let's just say it's far from over, this bank credit money can't pay, won't pay sort of thing. And the central banks are still doing all sorts of backroom deals to try and paper it over. Kick the can down the road, I suppose. Financial Times Alphaville again, buffering up at the Bank of England. The Bank of England can always be expected to bang on about the bank's financial health. Obviously they will. But with the Eurozone slowly imploding on its doorstep and with the global financial crisis still vivid in the memory, the bank was never likely to show signs of complacency in its latest financial stability report. They knock out these "how are we doing" reports. And just a couple of lines from the financial stability report. The main credit risk to UK banks stem from the possibility of losses on lending to euro area households and companies, should sovereign and banking concerns spill over to weaker than expected growth in the euro area. In other words, if those Johnny foreigners kind of don't pull their finger out, they won't pay us all our money back, and that could be awfully bad. It's always somebody else's fault, isn't it? Anyway, back to the United States. Bloomberg Business Week, US yield curve steepest since February. The extra yield Treasury investors demand to hold 10-year notes over 2-year securities touch the widest since February. They say on speculation and extension of tax cuts that will spur growth and increase deficits. They always seem to want to say what it's all about, but never seem to justify it. Yield curve, like that. Small interest rates down here for the shorter time that you borrow, and bigger interest rates out here on the 10 years and 30 years. Now, is that what Bernanke said he wanted to do with QE2? I don't even remember now. But what's a steep yield curve good for? It's good for borrowing at the short end and lending at the long end. In other words, if you can borrow money short, down on the daily basis, but lend it out on the 10 to 25 year basis, you can make the spread the difference between the two. And that's good for a certain type of institution that we generally call bank. Well done, the Fed. California employment in millions. This is a Grigor US chart. I've used it before, but just to show that nothing much is changing. 10 years ago in California, they employed 16 million people. Height of building houses, it got over 17 million, and now it's down again to 16 million. They've basically gone nowhere in 10 years, and lately, since the recession has finished, it's still going nowhere. California is still in desperate trouble and will need a new game to play. Reuters, Washington subway police to begin random bag checks. Officers will start random bag inspections on the sprawling Washington subway system, the Washington Metro Transit Police said on Thursday, last week, a week after a man was arrested for making bomb threats to the rail system. Metro Rail police officers plan randomly select bags before passengers enter the subway station, and they will swab them or have an explosive sniffer dog check the bags, according to Metro Police. I have no idea what having your bag swabbed means, but I'm sure they know what they're doing. Ah, yes, other people that I'm sure they know what they don't know what they're doing. This is from Grist, and its leaked documents show the EPA allowed B toxic pesticide despite their own scientists' red flags. Now this is Bayer, who make a pesticide called clothianidin. Now I just encourage you to read it, because Mystic feels that the EPA have made a dreadful boo-boo on this one. Leaked documents show the EPA allowed bee-toxic pesticides despite their own, the EPA scientists' red flags. And they've let this through to be used on corn countrywide in the United States. I think it's a mistake, but hey, they should know what they're doing, shouldn't they? Have faith. Have a good week. Bye.